Most people think procrastination means you're lazy or unmotivated, but that's not entirely true. Procrastination is not a personality flaw. It's a pattern your brain has learned over time. It's a reflexive response to discomfort, not a lack of desire to succeed. When you say, "I'll do it later," what's really happening is that your brain is trying to protect you from perceived stress, pressure, or even boredom. It doesn't see the task as just a task. It sees it as a threat to comfort or emotional safety. So instead of moving toward the goal, it shifts your attention toward something that provides instant relief: scrolling, snacking, distractions, anything that feels better right now. Let's get into what's happening on a neurological level. The brain is always trying to maximize reward and minimize pain. It's constantly measuring effort versus outcome. When the task feels vague or overwhelming, it registers as high effort, low reward. Your brain then naturally downregulates the systems responsible for action. It literally turns off your drive. So that's why we end up delaying things we care about, not because we don't want the outcome, but because the task doesn't light up the circuits that push us forward. In fact, procrastination is tied directly to the limbic system, the emotional part of the brain. It hijacks our focus and makes the immediate mood fix more appealing than long-term progress. But here's the powerful part. The same system that makes procrastination feel automatic can be retrained. Your brain isn't hardwired to avoid effort. It just needs the right signals. Dopamine, the chemical that drives motivation, is key here. Most people think dopamine is about reward. It's not. Dopamine is about anticipation of reward. When you visualize success, when you attach meaning to the work, and when you make progress, even just a little bit, dopamine is released. That gives you the neurochemical fuel to keep going. And this is why understanding the why behind what you're doing matters so much. The moment you remind your brain that there's a purpose behind your work, something tied to your future, your identity, your values, you change the emotional context. The task no longer feels like a threat. It becomes an opportunity, and the chemistry shifts with it. Another thing to understand is that motivation doesn't precede action. Action precedes motivation. This is a big one. We wait around for the perfect feeling to start, clarity, energy, confidence, but that's not how the system works. It's through doing, not thinking, that motivation is created. Every time you push through resistance, even just for a few minutes, you train your brain to associate action with relief instead of stress. That's how you rewire the loop. Here's something else that changes the game: reducing ambiguity. When the brain encounters an unclear goal, something like "I have to study" or "I need to get in shape," it stalls. It doesn't know where to begin. And in that hesitation, procrastination takes over. The antidote is clarity. Make the task ridiculously specific. Instead of study, say review 3 flashcards. Instead of work on the essay, say write the first sentence. You make the entry point so small that the brain can't resist it. And once you start, you engage the circuits that drive effort and focus. Progress creates momentum. It's also worth noting that procrastination is not always about laziness. It's often about fear of failing, fear of not being good enough, fear of starting and realizing you don't have what it takes. But here's the truth. Fear and excitement run on the same chemistry. It's how you frame it that makes the difference. Instead of seeing the task as a test, see it as training. You're not being judged, you're building. That shift turns fear into fuel. So if you've been stuck, it's not because you lack willpower. It's because your brain has learned to link action with discomfort. Your job isn't to wait for motivation to show up. It's to create the conditions for it. Start small. Create clarity. Visualize what the work leads to, and then move. Because when you move, everything changes. Before we even talk about productivity or focus or drive, we have to understand one thing. Your internal state determines everything. If you're trying to force discipline, motivation, or clarity while your body is in a state of stress, fatigue, or distraction, you're already starting at a disadvantage. You can have the best strategy in the world, but if your nervous system is out of balance, that strategy won't land. You won't follow through, not because you don't want to, but because your body isn't ready to engage. So the real first step in beating procrastination and building motivation is learning how to control your internal state. Think of it this way. Your brain is constantly interpreting signals from your body. If your breath is shallow, your posture is collapsed, your eyes are darting around, your body is telling your brain that you're under threat. And the brain responds accordingly. It shuts down focus, raises cortisol, and moves you into a defensive, reactive mode. In that state, even simple tasks feel overwhelming. You'll reach for your phone, get lost in distractions, or put things off. Not because you're lazy, but because your physiology is telling your brain, survive first, work later. But when you learn how to shift your body out of that stress response, something powerful happens. You reclaim control. There are very simple tools you can use to do this, and they don't take hours or require perfect conditions. They just require intention. One of the fastest ways to shift your state is through your breath. Long exhales signal safety to the nervous system. Just 2 or 3 rounds of deep, slow breathing, making the exhale longer than the inhale, can bring your system back into balance. It's subtle, but it's powerful. You're not calming yourself down to be passive. You're calming yourself down so your brain can re-engage and do the work that matters. Another powerful tool is visual anchoring. Your visual system is closely tied to your brain's alertness. When you're focused on a screen or locked into a narrow space for too long, your brain can start to fatigue. But when you deliberately look out at a wide visual field, like looking out a window or stepping outside, it tells the brain, we're not under immediate threat, we can focus. Just 30 to 60 seconds of widening your gaze shifts your internal chemistry. You feel more grounded, more present, and more ready to act. Cold exposure, even just a splash of cold water or a quick cold shower, also sends a clear signal to the body, wake up. It spikes norepinephrine, which sharpens focus and attention. You're not using discomfort as punishment, you're using it as a switch to flip your system from passive to active. It's a way of saying, let's go, without needing to talk yourself into anything. Movement works the same way. When you move your body, jumping jacks, a quick walk, stretching, you shift blood flow, activate your vestibular system, and re-engage the parts of your brain involved in action. You create momentum before the task even begins. Most people think motivation is a mental game, but it starts in the body. If you feel sluggish, distracted, or mentally foggy, don't push through it. Shift your state first. Once your internal state is aligned, calm but alert, present but not tense, you'll notice something incredible. The resistance starts to fade. That task you were putting off suddenly feels more doable. The mental fog clears. The urge to scroll or distract weakens. You're not forcing yourself to work, you're ready to work. Because the systems in your body and brain are finally pointing in the same direction. This is why I always say, don't start with the task, start with your state. Because once you learn how to shift your internal environment, the external behavior takes care of itself. One of the most overlooked elements of productivity and motivation is timing. Not just how you manage your time, but when you choose to work based on how your brain and body naturally operate. A lot of people assume that success is about grinding it out from morning to night, pushing through regardless of how they feel. But the truth is, your brain doesn't run on a flat line. It moves in waves. If you understand those waves and work with them instead of against them, you can get more done in 2 focused hours than in an entire distracted day. Your brain follows natural rhythms, circadian and ultradian rhythms. Circadian rhythms are tied to your sleep-wake cycle. Ultradian rhythms are the shorter cycles, about 90 to 120 minutes long, where your brain naturally shifts between high alertness and a dip in energy. So what does that mean in real terms? It means that your focus, your energy, your ability to stay locked in, it all fluctuates during the day. You're not supposed to be on all the time. There are natural peaks and valleys. And when you align your work with those peaks, your productivity and motivation increase effortlessly. For most people, one of the highest focus periods is about 1 to 3 hours after waking up. That's when your brain is producing the right balance of chemicals. Alertness from cortisol, drive from dopamine, and focus from norepinephrine. If you use that window for your most important, demanding tasks, the kind that require deep thought or creativity, you'll tap into what's called a deep work state. You've probably felt this before, when time seems to slow down, distractions fade away, and you're fully immersed. That's not a fluke, that's your brain in sync with its natural rhythm. But what most people do is the opposite. They waste their peak brain hours on reactive tasks, scrolling emails, checking social media, multitasking. Then later in the day, when their brain is tired, they try to force themselves into focus. It doesn't work. You don't need more hours. After about 90 minutes of focused work, the brain starts to fatigue. That's when a short break, 10 to 15 minutes, can reset the system. The break isn't laziness, it's maintenance. During this downtime, your brain processes what you just worked on, stores information more efficiently, and preps itself for the next cycle. If you ignore these rhythms, you burn out. If you honor them, you build sustainable momentum. The same concept applies to your evening routine. As you move later into the day, your ability to engage in high focus work usually decreases, but this is a great time for review, organizing, light tasks, or creative brainstorming, things that don't require the same intensity but still move you forward. When you work with your brain's natural energy flow, everything feels smoother. You don't have to force motivation. You're using the system as it was designed to function. So instead of trying to push through resistance at random times, start observing your energy levels. When do you feel most mentally sharp? When do you naturally start to drift? Use that awareness to structure your day, not rigidly, but intentionally. That one small shift can double your output and cut your procrastination in half. Timing. One of the biggest reasons we procrastinate is because our goals are too vague. The brain doesn't do well with uncertainty. When you say, I need to study, or I have to finish that assignment, it might feel like you've given yourself direction, but neurologically, your brain sees a foggy, undefined target. It doesn't know where to begin, how long it will take, or what success looks like. And when the brain doesn't see a clear path, it hesitates. That hesitation becomes procrastination. The good news is that clarity is a skill. You can train yourself to take a large, overwhelming task and break it into something the brain can process easily. And when you do that, something incredible happens. You feel momentum. It's not that the task itself becomes easier, it's that your brain finally sees a way forward. Here's what's really happening behind the scenes. Your brain is constantly scanning for reward and effort. If a task feels like it's going to take a long time, require too much energy, or deliver no immediate payoff, your brain deprioritizes it. It's not personal, it's just how the system works. But when you make a task feel small and immediate, something you can finish in 5 to 10 minutes, you flip the switch. The brain says, this feels doable, let's go. And with that small action comes a small win. That win releases dopamine. And dopamine doesn't just make you feel good, it reinforces behavior. It makes you want to keep going. This is why breaking your goals into crystal clear steps matters so much. If the goal is write an essay, the first step shouldn't be write a paragraph. That's still too big. The first step could be something like open the document and write the essay title, or even simpler, write one sentence about your main idea. That's not just productivity advice, it's neurological strategy. You're creating a low resistance entry point. And once you enter, you've already won. Because starting is the hardest part. Once you start, your brain moves into a more focused state almost automatically. You begin to activate the task positive network, a part of the brain responsible for attention and action. And the more specific the task, the easier it is for that network to stay engaged. That's why to-do lists with generic phrases like work on project or read notes rarely lead to focused work. But a list that says review 5 slides from chapter 2 gives the brain a target. And when the brain sees a target, it wants to hit it. It also helps to tie these small tasks to time limits. When you give the brain a short window, say 15 or 20 minutes, it becomes even easier to commit. It's no longer about finishing everything, it's just about making progress within that window. That shift takes the pressure off and builds consistency over time. The reality is, big goals are achieved through a series of small, clearly defined steps. And each step is a chance to build momentum. You don't need to do everything at once. You just need to make the next action obvious and easy. When the path is clear, the brain follows. One of the simplest yet most effective tools for beating procrastination is the 5-minute rule. It sounds almost too easy, but the science behind it is real. When you're stuck, when you can't seem to start, when every part of you wants to avoid the task, don't try to do the whole thing. Just commit to doing it for 5 minutes. That's it. 5 minutes of focused action. What happens is subtle but powerful. The brain builds up resistance before a task, not during it. It's the anticipation that feels heavy, not the task itself. The moment you begin, even if it's just a tiny start, the mental tension begins to dissolve. You've broken through the friction point, and now your brain shifts gears. It moves from avoidance to engagement. And often, once those 5 minutes are up, you don't want to stop. You've already begun, momentum is on your side, and finishing feels easier than stopping. This works because action changes your internal state. You might feel tired, unmotivated, distracted, but the second you take action, even a small one, the chemistry in your brain starts to shift. You trigger dopamine, and that dopamine reinforces the behavior. Your brain says, we're doing something, and suddenly you feel a little more focused, a little more energized. The key is lowering the entry barrier. When the task feels too big or too long, the brain resists. But 5 minutes, that's manageable. You're telling your system, I'm not asking for everything, just a little. And the moment you get moving, it becomes easier to keep going than to quit. You've shifted from static to dynamic. It also rewires the way you see effort. Instead of associating the task with discomfort, you begin to link it to progress. You start to realize, I can handle this. And that belief starts to grow stronger every time you use the 5-minute rule. Over time, your baseline for resistance lowers. You train your brain to respond to hesitation with action, not with overthinking, not with avoidance, but with movement. You don't need to feel fully ready. You just need to start. 5 minutes is often all it takes to flip the switch. So next time you feel that familiar urge to delay, don't argue with it. Don't analyze it. Just say, I'll do 5 minutes. Because 5 minutes of action beats a full day of waiting for the perfect moment. There's a misconception that motivation is something you either have or don't have, that it comes and goes randomly. But motivation, like focus, like discipline, is something you can generate. And one of the most powerful ways to generate it is by tracking progress. It sounds simple, but the way you measure your effort shapes the way your brain experiences the task. If you're only focused on the final outcome, you're going to miss all the signals of growth along the way. And when the brain doesn't see progress, it starts to disengage. But when you deliberately track your progress, no matter how small, you give the brain evidence that your actions are working. That creates momentum, it reinforces the behavior, and suddenly what felt like a grind starts to feel rewarding. This is because progress, real or perceived, releases dopamine. You don't need to finish the entire project to feel good. You just need to see that you're moving forward. This can be as simple as checking off a box, writing down one win at the end of the day, or reviewing what you accomplished in the last 30 minutes. It's not about ego or productivity for productivity's sake. It's about reminding your nervous system, what I'm doing matters. That sense of direction and reward is what keeps the drive alive, especially on the days when motivation doesn't come naturally. It also creates what's called a feedback loop. When you see progress, your brain feels good. When it feels good, it wants to keep going. When you keep going, you make more progress, and that loop begins to build on itself. This is how consistency is formed. Not through willpower alone, but by creating a system where action and reward are tightly linked. Most people only reward the result. They only feel accomplished when the whole thing is done. But if you wait until the end to feel successful, you're delaying the very chemistry that helps you get there. So you need to bring that reward into the process. You celebrate the reps, not just the result. You mark the wins as they happen, not just when they're complete. It doesn't have to be dramatic, just visible, just consistent. Because when the brain can see progress, even in tiny steps, it naturally begins to crave the next step. And that's how you turn motivation from something you chase into something you build. So if you want to stop procrastinating and truly build lasting motivation, you don't need to wait for inspiration or force yourself through willpower alone. You need to understand how your brain and body work and then use that knowledge to your advantage. Shift your internal state before you begin. Align your tasks with your natural energy rhythms. Make your goals crystal clear and immediately actionable. Use the 5-minute rule to break resistance. And most importantly, track your progress. Because even small wins change the way your brain sees effort. You don't need to do more, you just need to do things differently. And once you do, the resistance starts to fade, the fog lifts, and momentum begins to build, not all at once, but one focused, intentional step at a time.